The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
You've always got time for short time.
Hey, it's Mario Lopez.
David Taylor.
Brent Metcalf. Johnny Hendricks. Tony Ramos. Bubba J.
Mike Golick.
Matthew Modine.
The one and only Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to the one and only Short Time Wrestling Podcast by the often imitated and never duplicated Jason Bryant.
Episode 277 of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. It is August, folks, and it's August 2016. And you know what that means? It means we are getting ever so close to the Olympic Games. We're talking the Olympics today with our guest, Nancy Armour. She is a sports columnist for USA Today and one of the top Olympic writers in the country, if not the world. She has covered numerous Olympic Games going back to 1996 in Atlanta. Summer, winter, you name it, she's done it. Nancy Armour was a tremendous guest. We'll get to her later. Before we get to our Olympic discussion today, and you'll see this as a prevailing theme throughout the course of the interview here on episode 277. Thanks for listening, by the way. If this is your first time listening, thank you. If you like it, at the end of the show, click subscribe. Go to matttalkonline.com/get short time. You can subscribe through iTunes there. But anyway, as I was saying, one of the prevailing themes that we have on this episode is about clicks, about what people are reading, what gets in the paper. It used to be what the people were buying, who was buying papers, and what reader surveys were saying. Well, now reader surveys are basically how many clicks on a website is a story about wrestling or lacrosse or gymnastics or tiddlywinks or Quidditch getting to justify an editor spending the money and the budget to send staff to cover these events. Nancy will talk about this on the episode later, but this is something that goes with what I produce here at Matt Talk Online, and it's the daily wrestling email list. Every day, you're getting anywhere from, say 5 to 20 different stories, more closer to 20. And they're not just from wrestling websites. So wrestling people, we're going to click on our own. But these are from websites that are owned by Gannett, which is actually the parent company of USA Today. It's a Gannett-owned paper, just like the Chicago Tribune owns a number of papers, like my old paper, the Daily Press. I mean, these companies, they see these clicks. So each day I'm giving you the best wrestling news, and not all of it coming from wrestling-specific websites. Therefore, there is an opportunity for you to click more links right there. I'm giving you an opportunity to sit there and be like, hey, we can make a difference with these people. Every little click. I mean, the guys at Blood Round, I got to give them credit. They've been harping on this for years. You see a story about wrestling, click on it. You see a story on social media, one, click on it. And if you really like it, retweet it. You don't have to retweet everything that comes through. Then your feed would be pretty much just full of everything. But click on it. Those things will add up. I shared the Jordan Burroughs thing, the vote for Jordan Burroughs for the flag bearer thing on my personal Facebook account. Not like a gigantic, I've got probably 7,500 followers on Twitter. I'm pretty much approaching that 5,000 number on Facebook, where I'm not going to do a fan page, folks, for myself. That is just completely pretentious. We'll not do it. I do have one for Matt Talk, but Matt Talk's only got 1,000 followers. But I shared it, and that story got shared about 250 times. And that's just one person. Flow Wrestling and USA Wrestling both tweeted. It got tweeted about 750. So at least as a time of recording of the show. So think about what those clicks do. And when those people are saying, wow, Jordan Burroughs is really hot right now. When we see things about wrestling that gets clicks, it moves the needle more than we realize. So remember that. And if you're curious about that daily wrestling newsletter that I put out, go to matttalkonline.com/news. You can sign up. It is free. It is free. Sign up for free. Unsubscribe anytime. Every single morning, you will get wrestling news from the previous day that you may have missed. Some stuff that is from India. I've been covering that Yadav Kumar. Now it's Ron. Dude, that's another episode entirely. I know Mike Mal and the Nomad kind of touched on that a little bit on Malicious Intent, but I've beaten it to death, and it took a new wrinkle. And I kind of touched on it last episode. But anyway, speaking of this show, we'll continue talking about things of this nature. I'm not sure how many shows I'll be able to do from Rio, because I will leave to go to Rio on August 8th. I land the 9th, and I will not return back to the United States until August 24th. Where does that leave my wife and 2 daughters? Hopefully in the helpful hands of my in-laws. That's another reason why we moved back to Minnesota. But yeah, so I will be out of country for 2.5 weeks as my daughter Ruby is now about 3 weeks old. Yeah, this whole newborn thing is just crazy. Although she doesn't sound like a velociraptor anymore. She's starting to have a few different sounds and dialects of scream. So it's not all feed me. Yeah, but all they do, and babies, man, all they do is eat, sleep, and crap. I tell you that. That is not, that's not overstating it. Anyway, Nancy Armour is our guest on the show today. A couple things. If this is your first time, if this is not your first time, this is your first time, I want you to subscribe to the show. If this is not your first time and you're a repeat listener of this program, there are a couple things I'd like you to do. One, if you haven't already subscribed to it, but you listen to the show, just go to madtalkonline.com/getshorttime. That'll take you right to iTunes. There is a whole bucket of links on the right side of madtalkonline.com underneath where it says subscribe and short time. You know, iHeartRadio, you name it, we got it. The only place I think we're not around is Spotify, but I don't listen to Spotify anyway. You like it, rate and review the show on iTunes. That helps with several different things, including rankings. Quint Eno from Elizabethtown, the latest guy to leave a 5-star rating and review, and he did that for the entire Matt Talk Online feed, which is all 14 shows on the network. Thanks for connecting the wrestling world at every level. Thank you, Quint. Elizabethtown College out in Pennsylvania, right off 283. Spent some time out there a couple years. Quint, the assistant coach there with Coach Eric Walker, as my friend Nate calls him, Repeat. But anyway, that's another inside joke there. Last thing I want you to do is if you are repeatedly listening to this show and you like all the content, you like the newsletter, you like the college standings that I do. I'm the only place in the country that does that. You like the daily newsletter, you like the standings, you like the 14 different shows on the network. We're largely fan-supported. Largely fan-supported. Yes, Compound Clothing at cmpclothing.com and Flips Wrestling at flipswrestling.com do provide this show with some partnerships and sponsorships. But the lion's share of this comes from you, the listener. So, you like what you hear. Throw me $1 or $2 a month. That's all I'm asking. Nothing going to break the bank. Go to madtalkonline.com/join the team. That's how you can be part of this team that is the Mad Talk Podcast Network. The shirts have gone over great. The only way you can get them is being part of the team. Again, madtalkonline.com/join the team. Throw me $1 or $2. If you get up to the $5 level, you get a shirt. We get some more hats. We got some draft glasses, things of that nature. Anyway, a couple other things I want to talk about. Before we get to Nancy Armour, I realize if this is you're waiting to hear Nancy, sorry, this is what you get. Actually, I shouldn't apologize. I got a couple Olympic stats for you. 1, 27 days. What's that? That's the last time I had a chew. Okay, I've been fighting with tobacco and nicotine addiction for a long time. I've quit on numerous occasions. And 27 days without one. I went through the entire junior nationals without one. I used to go through like a can a day when I was in Fargo. I mean, geez. Good thing Willie wasn't there with me this year. That would have been really tough. Other thing, no new news on the Bison turf burning down, other than it burned down. They want to tear it down. The owner says, screw you, we'll have it up in 60 days. That's going to be a nice little cluster muck over there in Fargo. We got some interesting wrestling stats coming through the Twitter world from United World Wrestling, at Wrestling, that I helped put together for them. You can check them out on the web by following United World Wrestling, at Wrestling. A couple things I want to throw at you that have not been tweeted out is that 115 of the 348 wrestlers are returning Olympians. Yep, 115 of 348 have competed in the event before. 209 of those wrestlers, 209, those 348 athletes, have some level of world-level medal, whether it be a world medal at the senior level, cadet, junior, youth Olympic Games, world military, world university. I even only included the beach world champions because I think there's a couple Africans that have beach world championships in there. But yeah, so 209 of the 348 have some level of world level gold, silver, bronze. That's impressive. 4-time Olympians. We've never had a 4-time Olympic champion. Last opportunity we had with that was some guy named Karelin, and some farm boy from Wyoming beat him. His name was Rulon Gardner. Karelin went gold, 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 silver. Arthur Tamazov from Uzbekistan, he went silver, gold, gold, gold. Two women from Japan have an opportunity to make history. Saori Yoshida and Kaori Icho are 3 for 3. They've won more world championships than cadets have been alive. I mean, let's just say it's like 15-10 or 15-12 right now. I've got the numbers over here, but each one of them have 3 Olympic championships. Mayan Lopez of Cuba in his 4th Olympic Games, looking for his 3rd gold medal. And Yogeshwar Dutt from India, believe it or not, 4-time Olympian. One of the many stories to pay attention to are Yoshida and Icho. But of course, the United States still looking for its first women's Olympic champion. And we have 4 very capable women that are capable, as I said, very capable. They're super capable. They're extremely capable. They're so capable they can come in wearing capes. You know, it would be capable if they were doing this in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm going off the rails here. Anyway, Haley Augello, Helen Maroulis, Elena Pirshkova, Adeline Gray. They're going to make history. One, if not all of them, are going to make history. And if you're Helen Maroulis, you'd definitely like to be the one that prevents Saori Yoshida from winning 4 Olympic titles. And if you're Elena Pirshkova, the one preventing Kaori Icho from winning 4 Olympic titles. Hey, I like to see history, but I like to see history stopped. A lot like we saw it in 2000 with some guy named Rulon Gardner. Granted, okay, it was a weird penalty point in a clinch, but that remains to be seen. History happened. All right, enough on my little soliloquy here. Nancy Armour coming up now on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. This one was fun, folks. And now up on the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, we're getting in that Olympic spirit, that Olympic flair, and I can't think of anybody better to talk to when it comes to when in the media, the reporting, the stories that go into the Olympic Games than Nancy Armour, who joins us, columnist at USA Today Sports, longtime award-winning writer. You've been with the AP for a number of years. This is not your first rodeo when it comes to the Olympic Games. So dare I say, you might be one of the most experienced people when it comes to covering all aspects of the Olympic Games.
Thank you very much for that, Jason. That's very nice of you to say.
Working in the media for a while, I've seen the name and I'm like, I've got to get Nancy on the show. Just have to get her on the show here.
Well, yes, this will be my 11th Olympics, which is really just means that I'm old. But yeah, I mean, I love the Olympics. This is one of my all-time favorite events to cover, and it's funny. I've kind of described it to people like in a way, it's a little like going to summer camp. You get to see all these people that you haven't seen for a number of years, and you see some of the best sporting events in the world. So it's just very cool.
Let's talk a little bit about your position at USA Today, going into a columnist and having that background with the Olympic Games. This has kind of been a natural fit. You've got the podcast Going for Gold, which you can find on iTunes and usatoday.com. I've listened to it quite frequently. Found some great stories with, especially guys like Daryl Homer. I'm now a fencing fan because of that episode with Daryl Homer. So I'm keeping track on non-wrestling type of things. And when it comes to basically getting a set organizational plan for the Olympic Games as a columnist going into this year's games in Rio, what is your general plan on what you're going to cover and how it's going to maybe impact later on down in the games, my wrestling viewers?
Well, this is going to be interesting. This will be my first Olympics as a columnist for USA Today. I moved over to USA Today about a month. Yeah, right about a month before the Sochi Games. And so I was doing a couple columns, but not many. So what we've kind of tried to do with this one is plot out, I'm going to be doing mostly gymnastics early, but then, plot out what are the other events of interest. And one of the ones that I do know that I'm doing is I'll be covering Jordan Burroughs, the day that he wrestles to defend his gold medal, which obviously, as you know, he would be the first American to do that since 1992. And I'm not sure if I'll be covering Adeline or not. I'm not sure if that conflicts with some other things, but, we kind of try and look at what are the events that people would be interested in, whether it's because of the event itself, because of the circumstances around it, or because of the people involved. So, like with Jordan, obviously he's such a great personality, that, he's somebody I think that the country's really just starting to get to know, which is a great thing. I'm covering triathlon because Gwen Jorgensen, who's an American, has a chance to medal. But then there's also the question of, the triathletes have to get in that water, and how's that going to be? So, it was things like that you just kind of plot out coverage of what is going to be of biggest interest to people.
At what point as a columnist do you sit there and be like, all right, we've covered the Zika, we've covered the pollution, we've covered the transportation. Can we just talk about the athletes sometimes? Is that sometimes make you pull your hair out?
Yeah, I mean, but you have to deal with it. These are stories that, you can't divorce it from the sports itself. But I am looking forward to getting down there because we've seen this with almost every Olympics. You've been to them, that there's always potential disasters in the lead up. And then once the sports gets going, for the most part, things kind of settle down. We're already seeing it with athletes are getting into the village. And, now we're getting some excited tweets and photos on Instagram of people who are saying, oh, this place is great. So, I am hopeful that once we get down there, once the flame is lit, that things do kind of, that the focus really does go to the sports themselves.
I was down there in February for the women's wrestling test event. And I guess my initial concern, and of course this was early February, and it was like, okay, the Baja neighborhood where everything is under construction with the venues, there needed to be some road construction, but I'm like, okay, right. Gonna be a little slow, but hey, London was slow. That was one where, having to negotiate the underground, the tube and stuff was, you've got a giant metropolitan area. You're going to have traffic. But when it comes to Rio, from what you've heard, what projects do you think are actually probably coming fuller to completion that they were actually worried about, that people are going to be like, this is no big deal?
Well, I was down there 2 years ago for the World Cup. So I didn't get over to Baja, though, which was, at the time was pretty much just a big mud pit.
Fairly brand new as well.
It is. And I think all of the venues are done. The one that they had some concerns about was the velodrome, but I think that in the last month or so, what was left was just finishing touches, putting in some of the spectator seats, doing little things here and there, but the track itself was done. So, I think in terms of from an athlete perspective, from the competitive perspective, all of those things are done, which let's be honest, that's what matters. That's what these are supposed to be about. The one that I think is going to be of next most importance is the subway line that goes from the center of the city to the Baja neighborhood, because you've been down there, Baja is not close to the center of the city. It's about 45 minutes from Copacabana, depending upon how traffic is. And the subway line will ease traffic, will ease congestion, will ease transportation greatly. But they don't think it's going to be done. The projected date is August 1st, which is only 4 days before the opening ceremony. So that one that's the one I'm curious to see, because we have seen some of the projects. Construction has not been the greatest. Let's say there was a collapse of a elevated bike path a few months ago. So I'm hopeful that A, the subway line gets done, and that B, it was built well, because not only do you have to have this for the Olympics, but this is something that is going to be used by the people of Rio for years to come.
We talk about the venues in itself, and with the Baja neighborhood, the Olympic Village, for those who are unfamiliar with how things are going to be laid out, the Olympic Village is basically across the street from those three karaoke, the major arenas, and then the Olympic Path, the tennis courts, the main press center, which I'm assuming you're going to be hanging out most of the time down there. So it's all right down there next to one of the lagoons. So geographically, the athletes won't have the issues in transportation, at least to those venues. But just based on the layout, they are higher. They look good from the street, I can tell you that. They do look pretty sharp. But as we get to the media aspect of it and covering these games, gallivanting around giant metropolitan areas as you've done in covering the Olympic Games, I mean, how do you balance that workload and decide from one day to the other? It goes, okay, I think we're going to focus hypothetically on Adeline Gray here. Then we got to Burroughs. Then we got to go, we've got gymnastics with Gabby Duck. We got so many stories. Michael Phelps, Lochte, of course. You've got so many different angles that these niche sports are pulling you in directions. How do you balance all that?
Well, like I said, it is really about what do we think are going to be the best stories or that are going to be the most interest to readers. And, it's different too for a paper like USA Today or the New York Times, which are more national publications than, say, a paper that has a very concentrated local focus. I had a good friend who worked for the Detroit Free Press for years, and her focus was the big events, but it was the Michigan athletes who were in those big events or the Michigan ties to those big events. So, that plays a part. But for our perspective, it really is. We are driven by the stories. What has come up as a big story, what has developed or what we think will develop into a great story. And sometimes things just fall in your lap. It could be just that nothing jumped out at you that day, so you decide to go out to modern pentathlon and, you find a good story. That is the beautiful thing about the Olympics, is that you can find a good story in any venue you go into. And sometimes, honestly, the smaller sports are provide you with the better stories because they're athletes that people don't know. So, their story has not been done to death. And most of those athletes too don't get a ton of publicity. So they're happy to, sit and talk with you for 10, 15 minutes or, share their story and share what it's been like to get to these games and what it's taken for them to get there.
Yeah, you said modern pentathlon. I think that's a dirty word around wrestling circles still from the Sting from a couple years ago. But as we move forward and you talk about these sports, every 4 years, the Olympics come back, and whether it be the winter or the summer games. And in the summer games, we've got gymnastics where people like, back in the 80s, Mary Lou Retton became a national hero. I was just growing up in that time, so I vaguely remember the 84 games. But, Michael Phelps in swimming and wrestling, we've had Rulon when he beat Carellin, that basically those sports get a little bit of buzz every 4 years.
Right.
What do you think it would take for these sports like, nobody's really talking about track and field a whole lot except during an Olympic year, to get these niche sports, say, in the papers more, in the mainstream media more so than just every 4 years or every World Championships that may or may not be hosted in the United States?
That's hard because, the U.S. has, one of the great things about our country is we do have so many options when it comes to sports. We've got the 4 professional leagues, major professional leagues, some would say 5 if you count Major League Soccer. Then you have the NCAA with football and basketball. You might have a minor league baseball team in your city. There's so many different things to compete for your attention. Whereas, like, say, if you go to Europe, like in the Scandinavian countries in Germany, biathlon is huge. And but their main thing is soccer. They don't have baseball. They don't have American football. They might have hockey, but they don't have, the league is not on the par that the NHL is here. So it's tough for sports to break in and shove some of those other ones aside. You need athletes who are compelling. You need people to stick around too. That's one of the great things. And, I keep going back to Jordan Burroughs, but the fact that he's back, people might be familiar with him. Or, I was talking to some friends and mentioned that I was writing about him, and they kind of got a quizzical look on their face. And I said, remember he was the wrestler, All I See Is Gold? And they, oh, yeah. So they were aware, but they didn't, they couldn't really tell you anything about him. They just know like little bits and pieces. So when the smaller sports have people who come back, that helps because, you've already got a familiarity. Even if you don't necessarily know them, hopefully you've heard their name or might know something about them where it kind of turns on the light bulb. But in terms of getting coverage from, from Olympics to Olympics, one of the best things that has happened is, there's so much more opportunity for specialized media these days, that people, if you are a wrestling fan, you can start a blog or you can, start your own website. And a lot of people have done that. So there are options, outside the quote unquote mainstream media, which I think is great. Cause like I said, there's so much competition for attention now. And I think that's probably only going to, continue to be the case.
And some of that, I think, from wrestling people, and we seem to be very protective or kind of standoffish when it comes to not getting the coverage we feel like we deserve. And, we're seeing with Adeline and Jordan getting a lot of features on various outlets, whether it be SI. Adeline was in the Body issue. Yep. You wrote a great piece on Jordan Burroughs not that long ago. The AP and Luke Meredith did a great piece on him. But we're sitting there and it's like, okay, wrestling, we only got one shot. We've got one day to get this out, get these stories out for NBC to pick it up and be on the Today Show, we got one day. Whereas, I mean, guys like Michael Phelps, Ryan Lochte, they have multiple events over the course of a week to draw those medals. How difficult is it for mainstream media to sit there and be like, okay, we've got to invest some resources in this great story, but we've only got one shot at it?
And that's tough too, because, and especially with the way the budgets have been going, it used to be that a paper would send 10 or 15 people to an Olympics, and that's no longer the case. They might have 2 or 3. So you're juggling different things. I mean, you might have a local athlete in this one event at the same time that, Adeline is wrestling. So you might not be able to get over there. I mean, it really is kind of picking and choosing. And I don't want to say it's on the athletes themselves, but if you are, just dealing with like Adeline and Jordan in particular at the Olympic Media Summit, where they bring all of the media in and set us free on them, they were wonderful, great representatives for their sport, but just really interesting and compelling people. And if you have that kind of personality, that's going to attract attention, because people are going to say, oh, I really enjoyed talking to that person. I'm going to, I'd like to follow up on that. And the sports federations too, they've got some responsibility in that. I have worked with some that are not very helpful at all. And then I've worked with others that have been terrific. So I think it's, there needs to be a consciousness on everybody's part that we're all working with limited resources, and whatever you can do to, if you're from an athlete's perspective, whatever you can do to sell yourself or draw attention to yourself, good attention that is going to help. And if you're a media member too, you have to keep your eye out for things that go beyond the traditional sports.
When you were in the AP role there, instead of a columnist, you had probably more of a general assignment, like, hey, you're going to cover this, this, and this these days. When those stories just kind of popped out, because right now a lot of buzz is on Adeline, but the same day, Helen Maroulis and Elena Pirishkova, who are also gold medal threats, go the same day. That could be a huge, not just one gold medal day, it could be a huge 3 medal day, and then that's going to change the entire narrative.
It could. Yeah. And, Elena, by the way, has got also a terrific story. I mean, and especially given what's been going on the last couple of weeks with Russia and those athletes, it's really an interesting, contrast, I guess. So yeah, it could, because, the U.S. have not had a Olympic champion yet, and they could have 3 in one day. So it's going to be. And that's one of those things too, is that, if something like that happens, I guarantee you that people who are not even at wrestling will end up writing about it, because, that there will be buzz. And that is one thing that the U.S. Olympic Committee is very good about, is when they see something like that happen, they make sure to make those athletes available. Like there would be a news conference at the main press center. There would be quotes distributed, things like that. So they do go out of their way to help us tell the stories, or make it easy for us to tell the stories.
And going back in time, the way these stories have changed over the years, 20 years ago, hard to believe it's been 20 years ago, I was watching the Olympics in 96 going into my senior year in high school, and realized, and they were on TV. I remember the red, white, and blue channels. I think that was 92, watched the Dream Team there. And then it used to be, okay, let's file your story and go. Now with Twitter and social media, I mean, how much in just your career alone the last 20 years have just the world of social media and journalism and changed so much that makes it okay, instead of filing one story, one column a day, you've got to constantly be writing word after word after word.
It's completely changed. It used to be that you wrote your story, you filed it. At least with the AP, you filed it right as the event ended. You ran down, you got some quotes. You did
right through.
Yeah, so right through. You updated it with quotes, and maybe took a little bit of a different angle, or more of a feature angle, and
then throw the optional at the end. And
yep.
I worked at a desk. I know all these terms.
Then you did a refresh of it for the afternoon newspapers. We called it a PMR, but that was it. And now you are on Twitter or you're posting blog items throughout the event, you are filing something short at the gun, as soon as the event ends, you are running down to the mix zone and, you're putting some quotes on Twitter and you're also hopefully throwing something up on, Instagram or Snapchat. You're going back upstairs, you're updating your story. You're probably doing a podcast or a Facebook Live or both. You are also posting more blog items. You're putting more like quick hits on Twitter. Then once you finish your main story off of the event, then you have to turn around and spin it forward a little bit for the people who wake up the next morning so that they've got something fresh on the web. And then, by the way, you also have to have more videos and things like that. So there's also more fresh content. I mean, it never ends. And we're all doing that. It's not, no outlet has it better or worse than anyone else. I mean, everybody is being asked to do more and more and more because there's more of a demand for content than there's ever been before.
And how does that change the mindset when it comes to breaking a story or getting it out first or making sure like, all right, take a deep breath. Let's make sure this is right. I mean, there's got to be more of a sense of like, I got to get this out quick, but I have to have it right. I mean, it's not like, Twitter, you can pull it. Okay, you can delete it, but, gone are the days of corrections on page 2 anymore.
Right. To me, it still is, and I hope that this is the case for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're first. If you're not getting it right, that's nobody remembers who's first. They remember who's right. So, if it means that I'm getting quote unquote beat by people, hey, fine, so be it. As long as I'm getting it, as long as I get it right, that's all I care about.
Now, as it relates to the wrestling community, those understanding on how, I guess it's kind of changed over the years because now it's not just a print outlet and it's not just NBC with it. There are, various blogs and various writers that have their own social media accounts. So if you want to follow what Nancy's doing, you can follow her at Nancy Armour, for example, and know what she's doing the entire time. But when it comes to like, okay, the coverage, when there used to be a print page, okay, we've got a limited number of space. When an editor that's taking care of the assignments, how does that change? And what can basically fans go, well, why are you covering that instead of this when we think this was a better story? There's always going to be that battle on what demands the readers. I mean, which reader actually determines what goes in the paper? Well, I read it and they got in. I didn't.
Yeah. That's the call of my editors for the most part, that they've got, far higher pay grade than I have. And some of it is, we do very extensive research or monitoring of what gets clicks. If you have a story on such and such and it gets 5,000 clicks and you have a story on something else and it gets 50,000, well, no brainer. If it comes down to choosing between those two in the future, which one is going to get covered? So, there's something to that. But then again, it's, and the great thing about the Olympics and, particularly our Olympics editor, Roxana Scott, we're kind of all Olympic dorks. Like, we love Olympic sports. So if there's some, like if I go to her and say that there is some quirky, I don't know, fencing story or open water swimming or, something that is not, it's completely outside the mainstream, but I can sell it to her. She'll have no problem with me doing it, because she's, like I said, we're, kind of Olympic dorks, Olympic nerds.
Seems to me that sports is one of the few places where you can get away from people that always say that media bias, especially with our Democrat and Republican conventions that are going on right now. One, I hate politics. I'm not going to talk about it. But you also always hear media bias when you hear about that. With sports, you tend to still kind of call things like you see them, and you don't have that, okay, well, I slant towards this particular way, so I'm gonna write it like this. I mean, it's one thing that being a sports writer for a long time, it's like you basically call it like you see it. And what is the best thing about being able to cover an Olympic Games and try to present, being an Olympic dork to the American fan, in this case, the American fan base, even though there is a worldwide readership, is like, hey, this is what the Olympics are about. This is why you should be paying attention.
Yeah, it's, and I think people do like those stories. That's the reason people watch NBC, is because they get the fluffy stories and the things that are outside the norm. You get your heavy dose of track and swimming and gymnastics and, basketball, but you also get some of these, the quirky stories and the lesser covered stories too. I think by and large, if you're a sports fan and an Olympics fan, you just care about good stories. And really that's what us as reporters are all about too. Yeah, there are some events we might like better. Some athletes we're more familiar with, but we're rooting for good stories. That's what we like. That's what we love to tell. And a good story does not necessarily mean a good outcome. It's a compelling story. It's something that is interesting and grabs your attention. And like I said, that's what we root for.
I think some of the best stories I saw out of London were basically the celebration and the elation of the bronze medal matches. I remember Johan Uren from Sweden in Greco-Roman. They were just so happy to get that bronze, and Maria Unda, who was the first woman from Spain to win an Olympic wrestling medal. I mean, that was like, you saw it. So, I mean, it's like some of the bronze medalists were happier than it seems some of the gold medalists were. You get those type of stories. And then you got stories that just kind of just fall in your lap that, being a reporter, you're able to probably take in things from all different angles besides your sports desk. And there's situations where you might get an email or a tweet from a fan and be like, hey, pay attention to this. You're like, huh. And it ends up being a really good story.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, like Elena's story, I was not real familiar with it. And I got an email from somebody this week after they saw that I did the Jordan Burroughs story and said, hey, you should look at her too. You never know where things are going to pop up. And that is the one thing as a reporter, you should always have your eyes and your ears and your mind open, but never more so than at the Olympics, because you just never know where you're going to find some inspiration.
Now, I've talked with Adeline a little bit about her media tours, and she's kind of, get overwhelmed, and they're on these tours, various speaking engagements. She was with ESPNW and various other things, and Burroughs has been busy for the last 2 cycles. When you're a reporter and a journalist and you're looking to get a story, how important is it for the sport as a whole, say like the sport of wrestling, to make sure that those athletes are accessible and say, hey, I want to write a story about, insert athlete here, and you get blown off? That really is not gonna help them down the line. So, I mean, how important is it to be accessible all times?
It's very important. And I get, that the athletes have their, they've got their schedules and that is their priority. And I think most of us reporters are probably pretty sensitive. We try and be sensitive to that. But if you're from a sport that you don't get a whole lot of attention, that this is your moment. Jordan is a perfect example of that. And he's somebody who's been getting a lot of attention, but we had been trying to work out getting doing this, we wanted him as one of our 10 to watch. And when we were trying to get some time set up, it ended up, we weren't able to go until I think it was June, which for me, that's kind of the time I feel like we're pushing it, that we're really starting to intrude on their training time, their lockdown time. And I said something to him, we ended up going out to Lincoln and sitting down with his wife and Beacon. They were about a week from having Aura, but I said, thanked him for letting us come out. And he and Lauren both said, hey, we understand, we get this. It's not just about us. It's about promoting wrestling. And, we know that this is a limited window and we need to take advantage of that. So if we can be accommodating, we're going to do that. And that's great. And it might be a little easier for him because he is more established, but the fact that he is willing to do that says so much about him. And it really speaks well for wrestling too, because, he knows that any attention on him can only benefit his sport too.
All right, Nancy, we got a segment of this show. It's called Short Time. It's about 10 questions in about 90 seconds. I just want the first thing that comes to your mind, just kind of blast through it. They're all Olympic related. They're not necessarily wrestling related. So you can take a deep breath there. Are you ready for the challenge?
All right, let's do it.
3, 2, 1, 0.
All right, number 1, your favorite Olympic sporting event you've ever covered?
Gymnastics.
Most remarkable Olympic athlete people will not be talking about in Rio?
Bernard Lagat.
What sport and why should we know him?
He is track and field. He's a distance runner, and he's 41 years old.
Gotta love that. I think there's a 41-year-old gymnast out there too, right? From
yes,
Uzbekistan?
There is. Oksana Chusovitina.
I don't know if you wrote that, but I definitely read that recently. All right, number 3, all-time favorite flavor of Gatorade?
Oh, the red one.
The red fruit punch. All right, Mac or PC?
PC. Yeah, PC.
All right, now we're going back into that social media stuff. We're digging down the nerd rabbit hole. TweetDeck, Twitter, or Hootsuite?
TweetDeck.
I like TweetDeck as well. All right, all-time favorite Olympic athlete, whether you've covered them or watched them growing up. Who is the number 1?
Probably Nadia Comaneci. I was a 6'5", but I remember watching that, and I begged my mom for gymnastics lessons, which were a disaster because I'm so uncoordinated. But and then got when I was a little bit older, got the Nadia's theme record. Like I was and I've since gotten to know her, which is really kind of funny. And so but she was probably the coolest one that I saw growing up.
A lot of Olympics, a lot of travel. What's your favorite restaurant on the planet?
Favorite restaurant on the planet? Can I have two?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, here in Chicago, I love Rise Sushi. It's a small, neighborhood sushi place.
I'm writing this down, by the way.
And then there was a restaurant in Turin that was, maybe a 5-minute, 10-minute walk from the press center that we all used to go to. And the owners very quickly realized that they had a bunch of media people, and that if they were willing to stay open late, they could pretty much take the rest of the year off. A great pizza, great wine. They would give us bottles. In fact, I know somebody who took home 3 bottles of limoncello that the owners had given, just for the heck of it. And obviously very friendly people. So that's probably my second, but I cannot remember the name of it.
And number 8, your favorite Starbucks order?
Grande non-fat latte with 1 Splenda and no foam, please.
Didn't even have to bat an eye on that one. Number 9, your favorite sports writer of all time?
Oh. Dave Anderson from the New York Times.
Very good selection. And the best part about covering the Olympic Games?
Everything. The sports, the people, the stories, getting to see places that I probably would never see otherwise. There's no drawback to it. I love everything about the Olympics.
All right, this is an official short time question. You did finish all 10 questions. I think the buzzer we got lost. We lost the buzzer. Anyway, but now this is the part where I want to basically open up the wrestling world to pay attention to the Olympics. Okay, we've got the tail end. We got the last 6 days. Matter of fact, I turned 37 during one of the days of the wrestling competition. But
early happy birthday.
Yeah, I'll definitely. Well, I'll make sure I'll see you down there that day so I can follow up on that. But because I'll be spending some time at the NPC as well. But all right, there's an opportunity here for wrestling people to pay attention to other combat athletes, other athletes from around the country once every 4 years. Who are the top names that you feel like the wrestling community could really be like, I really like that athlete. I'm going to root for them. I'm going to follow them, whether they be American, preferably American, but if there's a great international story that would be cool to follow as well.
Well, gymnastics, Simone Biles. She has won the last 3 world championships, and she is a incredibly powerful gymnast, but she's very graceful and elegant too. She's like the perfect combination for a gymnast, and she's what she does is mind-boggling. So, if you like the athletic feats of wrestling, you will like Simone Biles. So go and check her out. Let's see. One story that is also not getting a lot of attention, but it should, is the women's 8 rowing team. They have won every major title for the last 10 years. Which is a ridiculous.
I mean, in anything, it could be like chess or
right.
I've won Frisbee golf 10. I mean, you win anything 10 straight years. That's amazing. And
it's not always with the same team. They keep, they have to keep obviously rotating people in and out. So to me, that is just absolutely mind boggling. So that's one for you.
Now, my next door neighbor in college was Anna Tunnicliffe, and she won an Olympic medal in Beijing. So anything on the sailing realm that you might be paying attention to. She's huge in CrossFit now, but that was one of those things that being an Old Dominion grad, I'm like, all right, Anna Tunnicliffe. So anything that might hit close to your home, be like, yeah, I'm going to watch them. Maybe it might not be the most politically correct to kind of have a rooting interest. Anybody that's real close to your heart to be like, I really want to see them do well.
Let's see. Well, I'm covering her anyway, just because I wrote her 10 to Watch story. But I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up in Milwaukee, which is where Gwan Jorgensen is from. And I love the fact that for the first year, actually probably the first 3 years of her triathlon career, she trained in Wisconsin most of the year, which, if you know Wisconsin, it's got a lot of snow. So
I live in Minnesota, so yes,
yeah.
I
and then she
that.
moved up there after she left Milwaukee. She moved to St. Paul. And she went to Wisconsin, which is where my brother and sister-in-law went. So there's, you like to see the Scotties do well. I'm trying to think. Other than that, And then you mentioned the 41-year-old gymnast, Oksana Chusovitina. She's, that just shouldn't be being done. A 41-year-old doing gymnastics at a high level.
Was it the gymnast the age is typically inverted. Usually you're seeing 14, not 41.
Well, the best stat that I always trot out is her first World Championships team was with the Soviet Union in 1991. Valery Lukin, or actually, no, it might have been 89. I think it was 89, whatever year it was. Valery Lukin was one of her teammates on that team. Valery Lukin is the father of Nastya Lukin, who won the gold medal in 2008 and who has since retired. So she was on her first gymnastics team. One of her teammates has had a kid who's gone on to win the Olympics and then has since retired, and she's still going.
That's the type of stuff I love to hear. And Nancy, it's been extremely entertaining and informative. Hopefully our wrestling fans out there have got some new athletes to follow when it comes to Rio when we kick off on the opening ceremonies on the 5th. As we record this on July 27th, what is your schedule when you get down there, and what's your very first day going to be like?
Well, I leave on the 1st and I land on the 2nd. And so the first the first day on that 2nd is getting in, kind of getting my bearings, finding out where my hotel is, figuring out a way to the MPC, figuring out a way to the venue. And then we get going right off the bat. Actually, there's a news conference that afternoon. I think that they're going to introduce the refugee team, which, speaking of something that people should be watching, that is one thing. And if you haven't gotten a chance to read Tim Layden's piece in SI, you really should. It's excellent. So that's on the 2nd, and then gymnastics gets going with training on the 3rd and the 4th. So that's one thing with the Olympics. You hit the ground running and you do not stop until they end.
And we can follow Nancy on Twitter at NR Armour. That's ARMOUR. Just making sure not like the ancient plating, but maybe more like the hot dogs, I guess.
The hot dogs or Under Armour, but sadly no relation to either.
No relation to either. And the podcast, Going for Gold. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I produce a ton of podcasts, but that's one show that's really gotten me in the Olympic spirit. I encourage everybody to go out there and find it on iTunes at Going for Gold by USA Today. Nancy Armour, thank you for your time, and we'll see you down in Rio.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It was great.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.